In a bid to restore order, the Syrian presidency announced the formation of an independent committee to investigate violations against civilians and hold perpetrators accountable. Tasked with uncovering the truth to achieve civil peace, the committee is expected to release its findings within 30 days, with the United Nations and global leaders condemning the escalating violence and demanding swift action to protect Syrians. The question remains, how can Syria navigate this critical transitional period amid rising tensions? And stay tuned for today's discussion on Think Tank. As highlighted by the New York Times, Syria's interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, appealed on Sunday for calm and for unity as he moved to reassure the nation after days of clashes that killed hundreds of people. The Syrian leaders spoke again in a more formal address announcing that the government had formed a fact-finding committee to investigating what had happened on the coast to bring the perpetrators to justice. He added that the government would form another committee to help preserve the civil peace throughout Syria. The newspaper added that the violence has been the worst since the end of al-Assad's rule, presenting a new major test of the new government authority and ability to unify the country. Over the past few days, the recent wave of violence has claimed over 1,000 lives. In response, the Syrian Defense Ministry has launched a second phase of military operations to secure the coastal region, while an emergency committee investigates violations during the clashes.
Syria has experienced its worst outbreak of violence this week since the end of Bashar al-Assad's rule, prompting the Syrian Ministry of Defense to announce the start of the second phase of the military operation along the coast, following the restoration of stability to coastal cities. The clashes, primarily centered in Latakia and Tartus, have led to a devastating death toll, with the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights reporting over 1,000 fatalities during the days of fighting. Despite earlier assurances from Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara to govern the country in an inclusive manner, the coastal clashes underscore the deep divisions that persist within the country, particularly between different political factions. Meanwhile, the European Union has condemned all forms of violence against civilians and any actions that threaten Syria's stability and prospects for a peaceful transition. In response, Syrian Ministry of Defense has formed an emergency committee to investigate recent violations and hold those responsible accountable. The committee will also examine issues such as the protection of civilians during military operations, the prevention of unnecessary use of force, and adherence to military ethical standards. With rising tensions and the nation still struggling with significant political divisions, is it possible for Syria to achieve stability amid such intense conflict?
For further analysis, joins us from London, Ammar Waqqaf, international politics expert, and from Cairo, Osama Saeed, editor-in-chief of Al-Akhbar newspaper. A very warm welcome to both our guests. Dr. Waqqaf, let me welcome you to the show, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. Let me start with you by President al-Shara's recent speech, who he emphasized that the Syrian state will not tolerate any threats to its national unity and public peace. How do you read and how do you view these statements, sir, in context of the government's efforts to restore stability after recent violent clashes, which of course was not expected yet?
Good morning. I think what happened in the past few days has really threatened the unity of Syria. I can report on behalf of the coastal area, if I may, that people there are currently questioning whether they should remain in Syria proper or not. What happened was that there was some military operation or military style operation on Thursday, the 6th of March. And, some people probably, because of a lot of pressure, people cannot find things to eat. They've been expelled by the hundreds of thousands from their jobs, can't feed their children anyway. There was a lot of humiliation, a lot of killing, massacres all along the past 3 months. They rebelled, they revolted, probably wasn't too much prepared. But then there were like thousands and thousands of fighters coming from inside Syria towards the coastal area, and every village along the way was, people, civilians were massacred and so on. We're talking about thousands of civilians who were massacred. When the military operation happened on Thursday the 6th, all the videos showed the victims to be armed men and in uniform and so on. None of the videos that showed afterwards showed anyone with any sort of weaponry or armed presence. They were all civilians. People were hunted down in their buildings floor by floor. Gold was taken, shops were ravished, cars were shot with 23 millimeter anti-aircraft guns and so on and so forth. And this is continuing as we speak in Slumfe in the mountain. The Ahmad al-Shara's statement, it's either it shows two things. When he issued the statement yesterday, the killing didn't stop, and we're talking about civilians and civilians. It means either of two things. Either there is a bluff somewhere that this is only because of the international public opinion has become aware or was aware suddenly of what was going on, and he had to
Sir,
appease
can I
people
ask you
and show
here a
something.
question, please?
Come again?
Can I ask you a question, please? On the 8th of November, when Bashar al-Assad was toppled,
Yeah.
was this scenario expected, or did any of the analysts in the world of politics read the scenario coming?
Well, if you think that the forces that toppled the regime were jihadi forces, and this is important to understand, their doctrine doesn't they treat others like the Alawites as kuffar, and their doctrine thinks that if you bestow stability or security on those people and they rebel, then you can go and slaughter them as much as you like. This is what happened. They just went and publicly punished thousands of people, many of whom now are taking refuge in the military airbase, the Russian military airbase in Latakia, near Jabli, called Hmeimim. And people are refusing to go back to their houses because they know that there would be consequences. This was definitely expected, but what people thought at the time was that if they lay down their weapons and extend a hand, then they would be treated respectfully. Now, other communities in Syria didn't do as such. Probably they were right. There were people like the Druze communities in the south of Syria, like the Kurdish communities, northeast Syria. They didn't lay down their weapons. And after what happened in the coastal area in Syria, I very much doubt that this will ever happen now. I think peace and stability in Syria have taken a very large hit, and we don't know whether this government can as such. It's really untenable.
Dr. Saeed, Shara also announced the formation of a high committee to investigate violence in the coastal region and hold perpetrators accountable. How can this new committee uncover the truth and ensure justice amid rising tensions? And of course, you heard Dr. Ammar when he was speaking and answering his narrative.
First of all, good morning to you and to the viewers and the honorable guest. Of course, this is the most difficult test to the new Syrian regime. There are a lot of questions raised for the Syrian government to answer regarding these events. I agree with the honorable guest that a lot of the things that has been announced is not clear are not clear enough, and no one can be sure about the conflict that took place in the coastal area, especially targeting the Alawite faction. There has to be independent resources to pursue the measures by the Syrian government. The major challenge here that is not only confined in what the Shara stated, that the state is on the verge of a civil war, but the Syrian government and its performance will be a matter of question and will have a lot of implication in the future. Everyone is wondering how the Syrian regime will handle this major challenge for the entity, for the Syrian state, especially that some militias and the government supported militias that joined the Syrian military or did not join, and these militias that have different visions that does not the or mirrors the state vision will be a threat to the peace in the state and will have a lot of implications on the demographic components, especially that Syria has different factions and different minorities and communities. So wisdom must be pursued and not power. Only the security approach will be very limited. There has to be a political processing, and President Shara yesterday announced a fact-finding mission to be formed to investigate the violence that took place in the regional in the coastal area. He's trying to provide a political solution, but in my opinion, political solutions must be more comprehensive, integrating all the factions of the Syrian people in the political process. President Shara himself admitted that these violence are not new. There has been more violence 1 month ago, and these violence are now recurrent, which is an evidence that the way the Syrian government handled the situation before was not sufficient to address the roots of and the causes of the crisis, and therefore it escalated further and the condition worsened. The Syrian government had to answer these questions, and the fact-finding mission is a good step, but we are waiting for the outcomes of this mission. Will it be a transparent investigation, and will there be an investigation of the street and square killing scenes by government supported elements? I think that the report and the outcomes of the fact-finding mission will have a lot of implications and will answer a lot of questions and will define a lot of stance in Syria and outside.
Dr. Waqqaf, you heard your fellow guest, of course, Dr. Osama, when he mentioned that Syria is on the verge of a civil war. Sir, do you read that Syria is on the verge of a civil war? And my other question is, sir, of course, as Shara tasked with engaging directly with coastal residents to ensure their security or the security of Syria, how can the committee ensure accountability while maintaining national stability in face of escalating violence, sir?
Again, what I was saying is that once the committee was announced, the atrocities didn't stop, and they're still ongoing at this moment in time, which means either of two things. A, the committee itself isn't really true, and this is only to appease certain international players, or the factions on the ground do not really answer for the current head of the authority. They don't take orders from them, this authority. On the prospect of this committee making any progress in appeasing the population over there, there is very little chance. People have lost all confidence. They cannot, it's very naive to believe that all these forces, we're talking about tens of thousands of jihadis who have announced jihad and went into villages shouting Allahu Akbar, smiling in front of the cameras, killing civilians, including women and children and elderly people, and posting all these videos online, that this is not ordered or at least approved by the central government, who had asked for like mass mobilization in the first place. And so this committee has very little chance, I think, in uncovering anything that has happened that would condemn the authority itself, and B, in appeasing the population. I don't think the population would coordinate with it. What is probably needed is an international one that has full independence and that goes under the auspices, say, of the United Nations or so, that could go and ask the people of what happened there and gives them assurances that no retribution afterwards will take place against them if they were to speak. And yeah, I think this is at least the minimum if we were to announce. We're still in counting bodies at this moment in time. You have to understand that there are families who were slain, and to the extent that there is no one to inherit, their property anymore. They just vanished, and this is unheard of before. On the issue of civil war, we don't know. Again, what happened sends a big signal to the other communities in Syria not to lay down their weapons. I think there is a political mistake that took place on Friday the 7th, which was the key day, the first day of the massacres, when a number of Arab countries came out with statements supporting the central or the Ahmad al-Shara's government in what they were doing, because they were describing that what happened in the coastal area, the attack that happened in the coastal area, was like, the old regime, men supported by Iran or so. I think this gave Ahmad al-Shara's government a sort of green light, not only an amber light, but a green light to pursue the lives of civilians and so on. We're not talking about devastated areas with no electricity, no water. Electricity generators were shot by, again, anti-aircraft gun in order to permanently take them out of commission. This is a huge problem. This is a huge catastrophe, and we're yet to hear any sort of sympathetic or questioning tone from the Arab states. It only
Sir,
took
I just want you to further elaborate, and I want to understand, and the viewers to understand. So you read that what ignited this more was that no international condemnation took place on the 7th when this happened?
Well, the United Nations did issue, the Office for, the representative for Syria did issue a statement. Guterres, the Secretary General himself, issued a statement, but they were condemning things. The United Nations doesn't have teeth. But what happened was that certain Arab countries issued statements supporting, or at least not condemning, what the al-Shara forces were doing in the coastal areas, even though it was clear that they were shooting. The
yes,
videos
this is my
started
question,
showing
sir. I meant that no international condemnation took place. They were supporting.
up
So
until
this
Sunday.
erupted all that took place and ignited what took place.
Yeah, the videos showing armed men shooting clear civilians, asking them, ordering them to crawl on the ground, and then shooting them in the head, one after the other, in Al-Mukhtariya village near Al-Haffi. This was, circulating very early in the morning on Friday, and it took up until Sunday to hear the French saying something and the Americans saying something, and only then that the government in Syria changed course.
I'll be back to you again, and I'll leave you there and be back again. Dr. Saeed, the UN has raised concerns over extremely disturbing reports of civilian casualties, urging swift action to protect Syrians. What role can the international community play in supporting an inclusive and fair political process in Syria at this point?
Well, first, the international community has a responsibility towards any distressed state such as Syria at the moment. But the question is, will the Syrian government agree to a regional or international role in the transitional phase? What we have seen so far, that the new Syrian government is trying to do things in their own way and not to engage external parties. They are only relying on the regional alliances, only the states that expressed support to the transitional phase headed by Al-Assad. And even if the international community has the will to help, will the Syrian government allow it or not? I think it is only wise that the Syrian government tries to engage the international community, especially that they need independent sources to investigate the violence taking place, and especially that there are no transparent standards within the Syrian government to carry out this investigation. If they need a new vision for Syria after Assad, Syria needs to engage UN bodies, international communities. The United Nations can play an integral role on the political and economic levels, in addition to giving assurances and ensuring some logistical support to Syrian entities. And also, on the other hand, Syria, with its current components, they are tending to a closure and depending and giving confidence with internal sources only, or external powers that only support them, and they are not really open to the international community, and they are not willing to engage external international parties to the Syrian government. They tend more to trust the close allies to this government. The other point that I would like to point out is that what has been stated by the interim President Ahmed al-Shara regarding the perpetrators in these violence are what's left of the previous Syrian regime, and holding them accountable for these. He is coming up with outcomes without the investigation and without the fact-finding commission. We need to wait for this mission to work, and all the former regime figures shall not be considered corrupt. The previous regime lasted for 54 years. They have deep-rooted relations with different factions across the Syrian communities and minorities. It's true that those who committed crimes and they should be held accountable with law, with legal pursuit, but we cannot consider that all those dealt with the previous regime are traitors and should not be considered as viable options for the Syrian state. The Syrian state needs legal procedures, transparency, reliable figures for the Syrian people and for the international community to provide a safe alternative for a transitional phase in Syria. But
Dr. Saeed, I have to ask Dr. Waqf here a question before I have to wrap up this episode now. Dr. Waqf, in 10 seconds, please. How do you read that according to Shara's statement, that Syria, with all its components, will remain united by the determination of the people of Syria and the strength of its army, of course I quote Ahmed al-Shara, what steps can the Syrian government take to strengthen its institutions and protect civilians, especially during this very critical period? 10 seconds, please, because I have to wrap up.
I had asked for the government to extend a hand of reconciliation to everyone inside Syria, to all components. This doesn't seem to be happening. There are questions about how authority works and whether there is any authority at all over or towards other factions that seem to be running like headless chicken, killing everyone. So there are a lot of issues to build trust, and frankly speaking, I don't think this government is pretty much capable of doing that.
Sir, thank you so much for joining us in today's episode. It was our utmost pleasure. Dr. Ammar Waqqaf, international politics expert, and from Cairo, Usama Saeed, editor-in-chief of Al-Akhbar newspaper. Very thankful for both your informative knowledge in our episode today. And of course, the question remains where the future of Syria and the Syrian people will remain and will reach. And of course, as the Syrian people breathed a brief sigh of relief following the end of Bashar al-Assad's rule, a new wave of violence erupted along the coastal region, reigniting fears of a broader conflict. The question remains, and that brings us to the end of today's episode of Think Tank. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.